Your program director for this morning's opening keynote address session. We're honored to have the Minister of Energy and Electricity here with us, Dr. Ramokgopa. Last year he joined us as the Minister of Electricity. This year he's here in his capacity, expanded role as the Minister of Energy and Electricity and the official Windaba conference patron. What sets the Minister apart is his intentional, transparent, and solution-driven approach to addressing energy security issues. And most importantly, he keeps the 55.5% of South Africans, which is about 30.3 million people who live in poverty, at the forefront of his efforts, ensuring they have access to clean and affordable energy. Minister, if there were a Champions League of ministers in South Africa, hands down, your ministry, which we are part of, would be Sundowns. And to those of you who don't get the reference, please meet me outside after the session for a crash course on the minister's favorite football team, on the condition that you dressed in yellow. Now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to welcome our CEO, the CEO of SAWEA, Mr. Niveshan Govender, to deliver the official opening remarks. Thank you.
The Minister of Energy and Electricity and patron of the Windaba Conference, Dr. Ramokgopa, Chairperson of the South African Wind Energy Association, Ms. Sunette Smith, board members of the South African Wind Energy Association, industry CEOs, members of SAWEA, officials of government, partners, sponsors, exhibitors, distinguished guests, organizers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the final day of the Windaba Conference and Exhibition. This gathering of energy leaders, experts and professionals is evidence of our commitment to resilience, security and affordable energy future. South Africa is navigating a time of not just an energy transition, but also a political transition and policy evolution where the need to rethink our energy future has never been more urgent. Honorable Minister, your presence here today is a testament to the government's recognition of the pivotal role renewable energy plays in the future of our country. The political changes in South Africa and the evolving energy landscape signals new opportunities for collaboration, investment, and action, all of which are being discussed, debated, and advanced at the Windaba Conference. In recent years, we have witnessed a shifting regulatory and policy environment aimed at addressing the energy crisis. Having successfully realized 6 months without load shedding, there is a clear shift in the country's energy reliability, allowing us, Minister, to refocus our attention on the just energy transition we set out to achieve. Minister, your role particularly needs to be recognized. Your active leadership in the Energy Action Plan and focus on Eskom's intensive recovery plan has shown results. We are confident, Minister, that you will apply the same passion and urgency to addressing the challenges hindering the advancement of wind energy at pace and scale. The changes we've seen in the electricity policy, particularly in the ERA Amendment Bill around unbundling of ESCOM and regulatory reform, are laying the groundwork for a more resilient and sustainable energy mix in our country. However, Minister, we must acknowledge the challenges that persist, whether this is specifically the grid constraints or more generally the structural reforms. There's intervention still required to unlock the full potential of renewable energy. This brings me to the role of wind energy. Over the past decade, wind energy has steadily established itself as a vital component of South Africa's energy transition. Our industry has achieved remarkable milestones, contributing over 3.5 gigawatts of installed capacity, supporting thousands of jobs, and delivering clean, affordable energy to millions of South Africans. Wind farms across the country are driving local economic development, creating jobs and providing sustainable power. This is not just about cleaner energy for us, Minister. This is about social impact and economic resilience. Despite the constraints that we face, the wind industry has 1.3 gigawatts of wind projects currently in construction, with their own set of challenges, Minister. And we have a pipeline of 53 gigawatts of wind projects under development in the country as we speak. Minister, as a sector, we have a lot more to do and a lot more to contribute. The Integrated Resource Plan has outlined ambitious targets, and we need to accelerate the pace of implementation. We need to create a more attractive environment for building and connecting wind farms, which are uniquely placed and positioned to help fill the immediate gaps in our energy security ambitions. Our technology is rapidly advancing, making wind power more efficient and more affordable. It is crucial that together we continue to unlock the regulatory bottlenecks, streamline permitting processes, and strengthen the transmission infrastructure to support a faster rollout of wind capacity. In doing so, we can meet the nation's demand for resilient, affordable, and sustainable energy security, all while harnessing our nationally determined contributions and reducing carbon emissions. Honorable Minister, as an industry of energy, we stand ready to work in partnership with government to scale up the efforts and to ensure wind energy takes a prominent place or takes its prominent place as part of the South African energy mix. Ladies and gentlemen, as I welcome the Minister to offer his keynote address, and we conclude the conference today, let us carry forward the momentum that has been built here over the last 3 days. Let us use the insights gained to shape the future of our energy landscape in South Africa, a future that is not only cleaner, but is also inclusive, sustainable, and prosperous for all of us. With that, I thank you, and Minister, let me invite you up onto stage to deliver your keynote address.
Thank you very much, CEO Mr. Govender. Let me also take the opportunity to extend my warm and sincere greetings to the leadership of SAWIA under the stewardship of the Board of Directors, whom I had the honor and privilege to meet this morning, and also have a very pointed discussion about some of the challenges that are confronting the sector, but also how you see the resolution of those challenges. So thank you very much. And let me also take the opportunity to greet you all in your eminence, and just to say to you as a sector, thank you very much for occasioning this opportunity for me to come and share some thoughts with you on the work that we are doing to enable this form of fuel to contribute towards powering the needs of the country. And I congratulate you also on the 13th installment of this Windaba. I was sharing with the board earlier on that we had occasion and opportunity on Monday to have a deeper and robust engagement with the stakeholders, renewable energies, trying to understand some of the challenges that are confronting the stakeholders in relation to the public procurement process of renewable energy, what we, in our own nomenclature in South Africa, we refer to as a bid windows, or if you like, a disciplined process that we use as government to go out into the marketplace through a very competitive and transparent process to procure renewable energy so that the South African people and the economy can benefit from this resource. And of course, the off-taker is the state, and there are also some sovereign guarantees, if you like, the credit enhancing instruments that accompany that process. The purpose of that conversation, like I was saying, is just to try and unearth, surface what are these constraints. And we're happy that Mr. Bernard Magoro, who is the head of the IPP, they've done exceptional work, I must say, since the inception of this program. Far-reaching, novel in the context of the continent, and transformative in character. And it has grown in leaps and bounds. We've gone through multiple bid windows, and Mr. Magoro and the team have done exceptional amount of work in ensuring that we cement and protect and advance the credibility of that process. And I want to say thank you very much to Bernard and the team for the exceptional work. I'm sure it deserves a round of applause from all of us. And I think what the conversation on Monday has done was to surface, like I said, some learnings. So the first thing is that we had not yet occasion and opportunity for us as the players in the ecosystem of that public procurement process to sit around the table and have a conversation around what are some of the weaknesses that are afflicting the process, what are some of the headwinds that, in our own considered opinion, requires attention. Because the intention really is to help to lubricate the process going forward. I've said publicly that it is our intention to ensure that we scale up the renewable energy share of the energy mix in the country for reasons that I will articulate. And I think that Mr. Govender does justice in articulating in the most coherent and crisp manner what are some of the first technology advantages of wind, but more significantly also the socio-economic impact. Because you shouldn't decouple the two should go together. And I think that we have not had that opportunity. And it was particularly revealing and informative just first to have an appreciation that as the stakeholders in the ecosystem, there's some degree of convergence on what needs to be done. So what was missing was for us to sit around the table and have that conversation. And I guess that is a South African weakness, just to see each other in binary terms, see each other as a polar opposite of a continuum, when in fact we share the same ambition of ensuring that we are able to achieve universal access, energy security. Of course, from our own vantage point, I mean, as the financiers, they also want returns for their investors. Project developers are also a motive, nothing criminal about that in pursuing an ambition to be wealthy, rich, contribute to the development of our country, and from a public sector perspective to resolve the socio-economic issues that are confronting us and helping the country to reach its potential. So there's convergence there. So there's significant amount of convergence. We're able to establish that. But also we're able to acknowledge that there are areas that requires improvement, and on both sides of the equation. And I'm sure that when Bernard was here, he would have shared with you, I mean, some of the issues that are confronting us. But At the risk of repeating him, when I do that part, I'm going to accentuate some of them that I think requires our collective attention. The one memory I have of that conversation, at least coming from the sector of those in the wind space, was I'm told that there's an environmental requirement that there has to be 2 years of bird observation. I don't know what that entails. So my imagination of observing is exactly that, just a visual. So you are watching the birds, so for 2 years you must tell us where they hibernate and all of that. So I'm not trivializing a very important matter of the environment and the ecology, but I'm sure ecological aspects of the work that we're doing, because we really need to balance a very complex equation. And that's why it's important that that conversation can happen. I think the point that was made was not necessarily to do away with that requirement, but they think that you can do it faster, we can find better ways of ensuring that we accommodate everyone. So we have taken to heart what the colleagues were saying, and I'm sure myself, Bernard and the team, we're going to come back to the industry and say this is how we think we're going to address the problem going into the future. I thought that I must just articulate first the problem statement. What is it that we are solving for? Before I narrate on what could be your contribution going forward, at least from the perspective of government. And I'm sure you can articulate it. I think your CEO has done justice to that in making the case for wind from a technological point of view and the kind of impact that it's making in society. I always make reference to what is happening at a global scale at some of these multinational fora, and the case in point is the last COP, just trying to understand and articulate what is the problem statement. And they articulate it by introducing in our vocabulary a term called the energy trilemma. So by that they mean that there are three things that are present that requires resolutions at the same time. So the first one is the issues around energy access. And of course it manifests itself differently from one country to the other, from one region to the other. But I want to argue that on the African continent, it's a preeminent question that is confronting us ahead of the other anchors of the trilemma. So we know that there's 600 million people on the continent that don't have access to electricity. With the advent of democracy, the victory of the democratic project in 1994 when we transitioned, those who had energy access was about 33%, depending who you speak to, they'll say 33%, 53%. But let's take the more optimistic number, 53%. It means that there's 47% of the South African population that never had access to electricity. And then over a passage of time, the democratic government has been able to aggressively roll out, if you like, energy infrastructure, connect households and support the growth of the South African economy. And the last time we checked, I mean, we're in proportions of about 93% of energy access. So that's a massive improvement. So if you take the optimistic number, so there's a 40 percentage point increase over a period of 30 years. But I'm saying there's still 7% of the population that still don't have access to electricity. So it's important that we do everything possible to address that situation. So that access has got two sub-elements. So the first one is the availability of that energy. So you could be connected to the grid, but you don't have, the energy is not available. So we introduced in the South African vocabulary something called load shedding. So essentially saying that for purposes of protecting the grid, we must deny citizens and industry their right to electricity because your generation capacity is not in a position to meet demand, and to ensure that the grid is at 50 hertz. So we have to deny you electricity. And we introduced the stages of load shedding in simplistic terms, one stage equivalent to approximately 1,000 megawatts. And you know that last year, 2023 was the most acute period of load shedding since the start of load shedding, which can be traced back 2007 on the 14th of February. It's a very interesting day, the 14th of February 2007. And we have not been in a position to resolve that question. And I'm not about to make the claim that we have resolved that question, but I'll tell you the kind of work that we are doing, and that creates a possibility of us coming out to the public and say we have resolved the load shedding question, but we're making significant progress. I make the point that when we get to a time where, when I'm introduced, I see Mr. Governor didn't do that. It's important, we must bask in the glory, but I don't want that to continue. When you get to be introduced, I get accustomed to be reminded the number of days when we haven't had load shedding. So I'm just saying, once we get to a stage where we don't have to remind ourselves, then it means that we are in a good place. But what's the point I'm making is that that energy must be available all the time. And of course, it's got new manifestations now, what we refer to as load reduction. Of course, that's downstream challenges associated with reticulation, and largely in poor communities. It introduces two problems. The first one is that for an average household that is experiencing load reduction, it really doesn't matter whether in technical terms we call it load shedding or you call it load reduction, the experience is the same. That there are extended periods in the day where I don't have access to electricity. And the second one is just pronounces, if you like, the energy inequality in the country that is largely poor areas, and for reasons that are apparent to all of us. Issues around illegal connection, the growth of those settlements, a lot of them are informal settlements, the inability of municipality to project that growth and therefore invest in distribution infrastructure that is able to meet the kind of growth that is being experienced there. And as a result of that, then they resort to acts of illegality, what in township language they call izinyoka. So the point I'm making is that then you have that problem of availability. And the second subset of that energy access is affordability. And Mr. Govender makes an important point. Bernard shared with us the other day that over a passage of time, the cost of the unit cost of wind kilowatt hour rent per kilowatt hour has come down about 70%. I think at about 56 cents or so 56 cents a kilowatt hour. So you can see that the greater the share of the mix, the greater the possibility of us making energy or electricity affordable. So it's in our collective interest to ensure that we are able to scale up, if you like, the share of renewable solar and wind as a part of that aggregate mix. So science has proven that, and also the bid windows have confirmed that. So it is in our interest to unleash this potential. And I'll tell you what is it that we are doing to help to resolve that question. And then we'll not be talking about an ESCOM that is asking for a 36% tariff increase, because it's got huge implications. It's going to erode the disposable income of everyone, but with a disproportionate impact on the poor. And what that does is just to accentuate the issues of energy inequality and result in some instances in energy poverty, where the poor have to make choices whether I have to buy a loaf of bread or whether I have to replenish my electricity units. You really don't want people to get to that stage. You and I, by virtue of being here, we are privileged. I think the choices are easier. If you like, the share of what we spend on buying electricity as a share of just the average spend of the household is not as significant as is the poor, and therefore the choices are not as difficult. So it's in our collective interest to resolve that question. And then the second part of that energy trilemma talks to issues of energy security, the ability of sovereign jurisdictions to be able to meet their current and future demands. So the ability to ensure that we are from an energy perspective, we are self-sufficient. And of course, we've got an obligation ourselves, historically as South Africa, to also support the region. I was meeting with my counterpart from Zambia. They're experiencing load shedding. It's very acute. Their total demand is 2,400 megawatts. They can meet less than half of that. So the extended period up to 18 hours a day where they don't have electricity. So you can imagine the kind of devastating that is being visited on the economy of Zambia and her people. So they were just asking, can you give us the megawatts? We are able to, we are at a stage where there's sufficient headspace, thanks to the men and women at ETSCOM, we are able to meet comfortably our own demand. And in fact, we've got instances, many of those in a day, where units are on coal reserve. So essentially generating more than what we consume, and to protect the grid, we pull back on that generation capacity. Now, our neighbors say, please help us. So the perspective first is a national interest, just meeting our own sovereign needs and then going into the future, helping the region. And it's important. I mean, the interconnectedness of the region is important from a roads point of view, electricity point of view, water point of view. You know, we draw a lot of our water, especially in Gauteng, from Lesotho. So it's in our collective interest really to work together. And South Africa is an engine, if you like, is a center of gravity of these opportunities. And I think that with our endowments, it's important that we share with everyone to the extent that we can first meet our own demands. So the issue of energy sovereignty is important, energy security, and that's why we have had conversations with the nuclear sector. We've had conversations with the gas players. We have had conversation, like I said, with those in the renewable energy space. We'll have conversation with those in the coal space. And I think it's important that we move away from an idea that the one solution is better than the other, and that's why we talk about the mix. And the one advice I give to players like yourself, speak about the strength of your technology, don't vilify other technologies. So it's not in our interest to do that. You know very well the non-dispatchable nature of the technology, intermittency of the technology, relies on the redundancy of base load. So we are better with this base load contributing to the grid. And in that way, we are able to resolve the issues of energy security. And then the third element of that trilemma is the issues of sustainability. We have made a commitment. We want to green the South African energy generation. We want to green the economy, the opportunities on the green hydrogen side, the opportunities on electric vehicle. Really, that's the future. So there's a rich body of science can be refuted that suggests the correlation between the fossil fuels, those emissions associated with that, and also climate change. We can have a debate about causality, but at least the correlation has been established. And we have seen that in our country. It has devastated poor communities. We saw day zero here in Cape Town. We've seen the devastation of the floods in KZN, more pronounced there. And it's really the poor that are affected by that. So it's in our collective interest. First, before we make global commitments, but just an appreciation as a country that we have that obligation. Sub-Saharan Africa contributes 3.9% of the total emissions. We contribute a third of that. So South Africa has got a disproportionate responsibility. Of course, in the context of the emissions across the globe, Sub-Saharan Africa is negligible. But that's why we've made the point at the multilateral fora that we're talking about equal but differentiated capabilities, essentially accepting that the rich industrialized countries, they bear the greatest burden of ensuring that they support financially and technologically, if you like, the advancements of new technologies. And I'll show you the numbers as we proceed. So I thought that I must just spend a bit of time just to say we're resolving that energy trilemma. But as the CEO has said, Mr. Govender, you're absolutely correct. I think there's the socio-economic elements. So as we do this, I think we're looking to broaden the flow of industrialization, reskilling people, skilling people, so that there's a justice in the just transition. I think is important. You don't want to decimate an economy because we want to transition put people into conditions of abject poverty because they are unemployed as a result of the displacement of certain technologies being replaced by others, and not taking account of what are the implications from a socio-economic point of view. And that's why I'm saying that our conversation in the South African context must have South African characteristics, and I'm advocating for a quadrilemma is a trilemma plus one. So there are 4 areas that we're attempting to resolve going into the future. And how we want to do that, we're articulating an integrated energy plan. So you can see issues of energy security, affordable energy supply. You as a fuel source, as a resource, you answer all of those questions. You are answering the energy security question. You are answering the affordability question. You are answering the diversification of energy sources. You are answering the emission reduction. Issues of energy efficiency improvement, of course, that also has to do with the entire value chain. You are answering the issues of conservation of resources. Unlike coal, thermal power, there you really need to spend there's an amount of water that you are using for purposes of cooling, and that's part of the critique that is there about this this form of fuel. And I think it's important that we have an appreciation, and the fact that we're a water scarce country, so it's more pronounced. So it's important that we take every action to conserve that water. And issues of technology, I mean, it evolves, and I'm sure it will continue to evolve as we are aggressive globally, not just us. We are just a small player. I mean, the Chinese, very aggressive. Many European countries aggressive, greater investments in R&D result in improvement in technology. That can only ensure that the prices continues to come down. Of course, the curve will not be as steep, but it will continue to come down, but also realizing efficiency. So you answer that question, and that's why you are going to be a big part of the integrated resource plan, which is the country's comprehensive articulation of the energy sources that are going to help us to meet the demand in the country. We are doing a review. It has gone out for public consultation, received 4,000 submissions, 250 of those have been substantive. I said to the team, we'll sit with those who have made the substantive contribution. So we're not opening, reopening the window of public consultation. We are simply deepening that conversation. Because some of the submissions, they raise issues around the assumptions and the modeling, and therefore how you arrive at if you like, the aggregate of the mix. They articulate a very cogent and coherent argument, and I said that it's in our interest as government to listen to the sector and the experts, sit around the table, and will be able to find each other. Because beyond this, once we adopt it, is an IRP that represents the country. The liquid fuel plan, I'm sure Minister Mantashe will share that with you, what its elements are, and the gas master plan. I think the gas master plan requires greater levels of reworking there. The assumptions are not as apparent, and also the modeling could be argued might be scientifically suspect. But the point we are making is that I think there's a science behind this, and the nature of science is that it lends itself to accurate quantitative expressions. So when we sit around the table, unlike if there are those in the room, I apologize in advance, unlike economists, so they are not sure on the one hand, and the other scientist is almost, like I said, it lends itself to accurate quantitative expressions, so are able to find each other. That's the point I'm making. So that's the work that we are doing. But the overall sentiment I'm articulating here is that you are part of that work. If anything, we must increase the share of that. I made reference to the issues of the just energy transition. As a country, we have committed ourselves to the nationally determined contributions. These are voluntary targets we have set ourselves after the failure of Copenhagen, as opposed to a top-down approach on how the targets are determined. It's a bottom-up approach. The sovereign countries determined, given their own conditions that are unique, to say these are the commitments we are making ourselves, and we arrive at this articulation of the nationally determined contributions. And we said that per annum we want to contribute anything between 350 to 420 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And what we then did, so it's an ambition, and then we had to put a plan behind that ambition, and then an implementation plan. And that implementation plan identifies 3 big areas of opportunity going into the future. The issues around electricity, how we generate it, new vehicles, new energy vehicles, and also the opportunities around green hydrogen, and of course, wind is going to be a big part of all of these interventions. And then on the back of that, then we computed in rands and cents how much will be required. And we think that will require in the order of magnitude of 1.5 trillion rands over the next 4 years. So the computation from last year until 2027, the state balance sheet can't carry that. The ESCOM balance sheet from a perspective of electricity is not as that strong for reasons that are known to all of us. So we must find bespoke financing instruments to help us to go this route. But the International Partners Group, which is a collective of industrialized countries, some of the industrialized countries have come together and made a facility available. We have agreed that will broaden, if you like, the size of that facility by also tapping on other facilities that exist outside the IPG, essentially trying to get to that number of 1.5 trillion rands. And then we accept that it must be undergirded by skills development. So it's important that we are able to develop new skills to support the kind of economy we are constructing. I refer to the green economy, the battery economy. It's important that we are able to address that. We are endowed with some of the minerals that are required to support the battery economy: cobalt, lithium, copper, PGMs, your rare earth elements. Those are very important in the context of this, and on most of those who are well endowed. So we need to ensure there's some degree of beneficiation, working with the Minister Tau, Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, on how best we can industrialize on the back of these opportunities going into the future. Essentially just reinforcing the opening remarks of Mr. Governor, that whatever you do, make sure that in that complex you are able to factor in the socio-economic elements. And then we went further to say, it's important. Like I said, I was saying to the board members, this is a science. One of the things that we have set out to do as this administration, but in particular the Ministry of Energy and Electricity, is that whatever choices were making must be supported by evidence. So it's evidence-led, if you like, policy making. So don't understate the value of science. So common sense is not sufficient to take us forward. It's a necessary minimum ingredient, but you need science really to help us to move forward. And we're able to compute what is the kind of ticket that is required for each and every sector. So there's a rich layer of work that we have done outside this, just to articulate what is required and what are those kind of investments that must be made over time, including the issues of transmission expansion. I'll say one or two things as I conclude about transmission, because it's a constraint, it's an albatross, it's the one that is undermining our ability to achieve this kind of ambition, but also to onboard renewables, in particular yourselves, where there is misalignment, geographic asymmetry on the location of these assets, and also transmission capability. Of course, Bernard would have shared this with you. What we are trying to do when we sat with the stakeholders on Monday is to reduce these timelines. So there are things that are in the domain of the state, permitting, licensing. Like I said, when we sat with the players there, yourselves included, the issues were raised, and we've just asked Bernard and the team and the department, let's look at these issues. We'll pull everyone in government. You see, for us to assert the credibility of the program, and also to be believable when we go out to the market that we are going to be aggressive, resolve the constraint first. So there's megawatts that are trapped in the process. So unlock those. Then you'll be believed when you state to the public that we want to be aggressive. But for as long as there are legacy issues that have not been resolved, so the credibility of the message is important. And that's why we said, when we said with the team, we want to undermine that. When I said with the board, a message that has been was repeated this morning from the conversations we had on Monday was that there are issues there from a regulatory point of view that are with NERSA, and I gave the assurance, and I want to say this again in public, we are aware of those challenges, they've come to my attention, we are resolving those challenges at NERSA. We're working with the chair and the board and the CEO. We will get it right. I really want to tell you, give you that assurance. And I'm confident that in the next month or so, you will see significant improvement in this area. So the board raised the issues of curtailment, there was a ESCOM application on curtailment, and its possibilities in unleashing, if you like, wind. I want to say in public, we will resolve that question and ensure that we are able to increase the share. And of course, this is really just to show you what is the track record, so the balance sheet of the performance of this program. It can be better, but it's still a major achievement that Bernard and the team have achieved. And I must say that we are the envy on the continent. Of course, we are a small economy, if you like, small generation capacity, but it's important, I mean, just that appreciation that over 7,000 megawatts in operation from 96 projects is major, when in fact your total installed capacity is about 51 gigawatts. So that's significant. The work that Bernard and the team have done can't be understated. And of course, the CEO has shared briefly what the share of wind is. We want to increase it. So we are not, we are happy or we're satisfied where we are now, but we think we can do better as long as we resolve those structural constraints. And of course, socio-economic impact should not be left behind. The participation of local communities, local industry. So the advent of this thing called construction mafia, you can undermine that by ensuring that there's substantive engagement with communities, local players, and they've got a substantial share in the delivery of that project. I think it's important. I think it's the next stage of conversation that you must have from the developer's point of view, project sponsor's point of view. So it's not about profits first. There are things that underlying issues that requires our collective attention. So we should not be dismissive of the demands, the expectations of communities. That should not be a nuisance. That should be understood as part of the realities that are confronting us. And all of us, we bear a common responsibility, a shared responsibility to ensure that we contribute towards the issues of local economic development. Like I said, this is the slide I like. I think it makes your case stronger. On the aggregate, these technologies come down 85%, 70 wind, 88% solar. So that's impressive. And that's why they have to be, their share of the mix must increase to resolve the affordability question, to resolve the issues of the possibility of a distributed grid, ensuring that the load is much closer to where generation is so that you undermine transmission losses and all of those. So we're working on that solution. There's some work that we're doing. We're going to showcase it. 2 villages in Limpopo. They've not had electricity. So what we're going to do using solar PV and storage, we're going to ensure that we connect them, including public lighting, including internet connectivity, and we have worked out that unit cost, the technical work is done. Unit cost of connecting is about 27,000 rand per household, including public lighting and also internet connection. We're doing that because we've got an ambition of ensuring that we achieve universal access in the 7th administration. So we have an allocation of 5 billion rands per annum. We're going to house it in one of our DFIs, crowding private sector investment. We are guaranteed that the allocation going into the future. So these private sector players, financiers can help us to front load so that we are very aggressive. We don't stop start. And I think we can achieve universal access. And on a basis on see-through what the demand is, then you can build an industry on the back of that. And that's why also on the renewable. What we're trying to do with Bernard and the IPP office is to ensure that once you resolve these bottlenecks, you don't do stop-start. So you've got the rolling bid window, whatever you call it, but essentially the certainty in the market that government is serious about this delivery. We have resolved the bottlenecks, issues around, from a transmission point of view, servitude access and all of that. I was saying to the board this morning, there's a legal instrument that we can use. Expropriation will compensate at a level that we think we can defend in court. That instrument exists. So we're going to use that instrument to ensure that we accelerate transmission and we make it possible for you to be able to connect. Of course, this is just at a global level. I've told you 7.3 gigawatts locally, but at global level you can see there's been a record exponential rise of share of renewables. Solar and wind have reached 12% as the share of in the global electricity mix, up from 10% in 2020. 2 percentage point growth globally, 28,000 terawatt hours of electricity generation. 2% is a huge amount. So it's important that we contribute to the size of that growth. Of course, our contribution will be minuscule, but once it gets to be added to the whole, it's going to be significant. The point I'm making is that the world is going in that direction. We're going in that direction not because the world is going there, but because first is in our interest to do that for the reasons that I've mentioned above. I think it's important, and also you can see employment derived from cleaner sources of technology. So these slides are important because we want to ensure that at all times we resolve both the technology issues, the issues of the environment, and the issues of employment and the socio-economic benefits. Those are important. We should not decouple them. The conversation must be above all of the above. And of course, one will be more pronounced than the other depending on the nature of the conversation, but let's keep the back of our mind that we are resolving that. So nothing significant coming from an employment point of view, the jobs point of view, from the southern tip of the continent. We hope that we will help to contribute and show that, in fact, the continent is going that route, and South Africa must be a leader. I mean, our position is almost unassailable because of the historic advantages that we have. We want to take that forward. And then the transmission, this slide, you know, the misalignment of resources and where transmission capacity is. The Cape Province is almost transmission depleted from the wind speeds point of view. If you're designing Atlas, you know better than I do. The resources are located where it says it's depleted. And when we announced the establishment of the NTCSA, I saw the chair of the board was Mr. Mavelane, was part of the keynote address. I'm sure she would have told you, I think on the 9th we are launching. We are not launching just to say to the country the NTCSA is a legal entity. We'll say to the country, this is how we are going to finance this expansion, and these are the priority corridors, so that we are able to inject, build confidence, but inject, if you like, some degree of investment in that area. You did say that there's about 53 gigawatts or so, CO, of projects that are in the pipeline. We want to enable those. As long as we have got an appreciation of where they are located. We want to do 14,000 kilometers. They are revising the transmission development plan, but previously we spoke of 14,000 kilometers on over 10 years that should be built. We're only building, I think over the past 10 years we did 1,400 kilometers. We must scale it by about 325%. So I'll show you how we are resolving the financing. So you must resolve the financing. You must resolve industry readiness. So when you want to build, so it's not just about the money, it's industry readiness to build that transmission. And we know that as a result of a dampened economic growth, industry has been decimated. If you look at the gross fixed capital investment, sitting at about 12.9%, ideally should be at 13%. That's the level of investment in the South African economy. It's got a correlation with, if you like, construction activity. And that has not been happening. I mean, outside the Sanral projects, there are no major state-led infrastructure project. This is likely going to be the biggest, single biggest program of a post-apartheid South Africa. So the industry must be ready to do exactly that. There must be certainty about this build program for the next 10 years plus. How you start matters, because that's how you are going to build confidence. Like I said, we have done the models, so we are not naive. There are people who have done it before.
So are not the first ones to start doing this. And I think we can learn, if you like, benefit from what I call the last mover advantages. So Brazil, India, Chile, Colombia, Mexico have gone this route. And we have seen that they've been able to roll out significant amount of kilometers over the period. I mean, the period 1998 to 2015, this ITP, Independent Transmission Program, they've enabled over 100,000 kilometers of new transmission. So it has been done before. That's the point we're making. So we're learning from those experiences of countries that are within the same band as ours from a development perspective, so that we're able to take that as a template and then domesticate it, so give it South African characteristics. So we know that there's a place for the state, there's a place for private sector. So if you like, there are these lines. Of course, there are many options. We have given these options to the NTCSA. We had given them a bit of time to mull over them. They have done that. They are coming back to me. But as cabinet, we have taken a decision that this is the route we are going to be very aggressive. We are going to design instruments that are going to enhance our ability to roll out faster. The sovereign balance sheet is compromised. The ESCOM balance sheet, the NTCA's balance sheet, very weak. They are starting from, it's a shell. There's no confidence about that balance sheet. It must build that confidence over time. But we know that there are credit enhancing instruments that are available outside the sovereign guarantees. We have canvassed it with the major financiers in the world, and they've said this is acceptable. They were part of the co-creation of these credit enhancing instruments working with National Treasury. So we're confident about the efficacy of this credit enhancing instrument. So when we come out now on the 9th or so, in the next 2 weeks or so, you will see that very decisive. When we met with business as part of the launch of the second phase of our relationship with business said, we think that our target for next year, the calendar year, on transmission should be about 1,000 kilometers. We're working with the team to see what is possible. But I think we must be driven by ambition. I was saying to the board this morning that when I sit with the ESCOM people, for obvious reasons, the majority of them, they are electrical engineers, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, and I tell them, I tease them, but the machines are failing. Yeah, the boiler tube leak there's a turbine failure there. The only things that work when you go to the power station is the civil structures. They are standing there. So we've got the capacity as civil engineers. We build very fast. We are very good. I know you look down upon us as civil engineers because you think your work is sexy, but you need us to get here, to sit in the building. We are very good people, civil engineers. We'll get this built. So I am confident about our ability to get this right. Like I said, there are various permutations, if you like, institutional configurations that are necessary. I did say that they are working on that transmission development plan. We need about 390 billion rands. We want to build about 14,000 kilometers in the next 10 years. We'll revise. But the point is, we'll make this possible. That's what I'm saying, Mr. Govender, to you and the team and the audience here. We think that gas is going to be a big part. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, we are slightly behind, 30 minutes behind with our schedule, and I wouldn't want to delay the program conference any further. Therefore, I'd like to, firstly, before I conclude the proceedings, I'd like to thank all our strategic partners, the Global Wind Energy Council, Get Invest, and the Presidential Climate Commission, to all our sponsors, and our speakers, and all of you as our conference delegates. Today wouldn't have been possible without your support. And I'd also just like to announce that the Minister's presentation will be made available, so should you need it, please get in touch with us as conference organizers, and we'll make it available. With that being said, I'd like to conclude this morning's proceedings. For all the members of the media that are in the hall, the press briefing will take place at the venue that's been communicated with you now, so we will head straight there. And with that being said, I'd like to conclude and introduce the next panel, which is the evolution of the South African wind energy. And it will be moderated by Wangari Muchiri from the Global Wind Energy Council. And that panel will start within the next 10 minutes just to allow the Minister and his delegation to vacate the hall. Thank you very much.